Hey everyone, I hope you're all doing well today. This time we're going to be talking about Warcraft II, The Tides of Darkness. I'll be going over the expansion pack at some other time just because that one kind of feels like it needs its own video, and I don't want to lump it in here because this one's probably going to be too long as it is. So we pick up 6 years after the First War, and the Orcs had won the previous game, and now they've built ships, found some new allies, and they are going to cross the sea to attack the rest of the humans. The humans aren't alone, though. They've also made allies in the gnomes, elves, dwarves, and also they've got griffin riders as well. The orcs are joined by the trolls, ogres, goblins, and also some undead creatures that their warlocks have created. So throughout the game, you follow the course of the war, and it plays out very similar to the first game. You'll start with some more local conflicts, and those act as your tutorial, and then the game will slowly throw more at you, and you'll end up going to either the Great Rift to destroy the portal, or you end up going to Lordaeron to destroy the capital there. At some point in both campaigns, there will be a traitor faction, whether it's one part of the Alliance that has turned its back on you, or they're helping the Horde from the very beginning, or it is one of the Orc clans that is going off on their own and trying to bring more demons into the world, or something along those lines. You'll have to deal with those. In the Human/Alliance campaign, which is considered canon for the series, the battle ends with you destroying the Great Portal. With the Orc ending, you overrun the Human and Elf kingdoms, and you gain control of Lordaeron. If you've played any of the other Blizzard real-time strategy games, or really any real-time strategy game at all, you'll kind of know what to expect with this one. You're going to have to gather resources, in this case gold, wood, and oil, and use that to build buildings, train troops, and then destroy the enemy base. You'll also have a few missions where you'll need to escort units from one place to another, or you'll have to, destroy the enemy, build a base, and then work on the rest of the enemies on the map. At some point, they will throw a few extra enemies at you, so you'll have like 2 factions of the Horde or 2 factions of the Alliance you'll have to deal with. For the most part, buildings have stayed pretty much the same in the second game. Some of the names have changed, but for the basic buildings, they're all still here. The advanced buildings are a little bit different because they've added in some sea units and also a couple of air units. I'll go over the military stuff later on, but right now let's just talk about the buildings you're going to have to deal with, or the ones you're going to have to build. So the farm is back. It did get changed for the orc side to be a pig farm, and this is going to control all of the population that you have to deal with. You then have the town hall, which is called the Great Hall for the Orcs, and this can be upgraded twice for each faction. So the Alliance get a keep and then a castle, and the Orcs get a stronghold and then a fortress. You can build defensive towers in this, which are largely the same, but there's a weird name change at the very beginning. Regardless of that, you can upgrade like your basic tower to either a guard tower or a cannon tower. Then you've got the barracks, you've got the lumber mill, blacksmith, and then both have a shipyard, foundry, and an oil refinery. And then there's also the oil rig, which is the same for both sides. This is where some of the changes come in. The Alliance have a stable so they can recruit knights, and the Orcs have an ogre mound so they can recruit ogres. Both of those units can get upgraded to either a paladin or an ogre mage. Then you've got basically the inventors, the gnomish inventor and the goblin alchemist. These are where you'll get your kind of flying scout units, so the gnomish flying machine and the goblin zeppelin. You'll also get sappers. They're basically units that'll go into a place and blow up. I've never found these units to be particularly useful, so I just haven't used them very much. And that's really just up to me, just not really thinking outside of the box on how to use those. Then you have the Griffin Aviary and the Dragon Roost. These are where you'll train really your only flying attack unit in the game. And if you have these in greater numbers, they become more of a hazard to themselves than anything else because they will hit each other with friendly fire if they're not lined up right. Then you've got the Mage Tower, which is also known as the Temple of the Damned on the Orc side. I'll talk about that in a minute because that was one of the stranger changes to this. And then there's the Church or the Altar of the Storms. That's where you can upgrade to Paladins or Ogre Mages, and then you can also get spells for those two as well. That's another thing that I didn't necessarily like that much, but, whatever. You have the same basic units for attack in this game that you did in the first game. You can train your Peasant and Peon. Those are going to go and gather all your resources. The Footman and Grunt are back. But then you have the Elven Archer and the Troll Axe Thrower, the Knight and the Ogre that I've talked about, and then a Ballista and a Catapult. It's amazing that they decided to keep it that simple, but I guess it sort of makes a little bit of sense. They did add in the other races here, so that's kind of cool to see. The naval units that have been added to this are the Oil Tanker Transport, the Elvish Destroyer or Troll Destroyer, the Battleship Juggernaut, the Gnomish Submarine, and the Giant Turtle. So one cool thing, so the submarine and the Giant Turtle can't be seen unless it's by a tower or by a flying unit. This is where the Gnomish Flying Machine and the Goblin Zeppelins come into play. While they can't attack anything, they can see, submarines, so that's kind of fun. And they can, for the most part, reveal the map pretty well. Aside from that, they're kind of useless, but, especially when you use the cheat codes in this. And then the Griffin Riders and Dragons I've talked about. They can also see, submarines and turtles, but they are very prone to friendly fire, so yeah, I use them a lot, and I really like them, but I try not to use them in groups larger than, 3 or 6, because they'll just start killing each other, and it's kind of annoying. Magic in this game has been completely reworked. I wouldn't say I like all of the choices that much, but it is kind of cool to see what they did. So, the Mage now has a Fireball, Flame Shield, Slow Magic, Invisibility, Polymorph, and Blizzard. The summons have largely been eliminated from this game, so that's kind of interesting. And then the Death Knight that replaced the Warlock. I don't like this because I would have rather had the Warlock in here because that creates something that's a little bit... it kind of makes more sense than having a Death Knight. But the Death Knight has the Death Coil, Haste, Unholy Armor, Death and Decay, Whirlwind, and Raise the Dead. So just to go on that one, I feel like the Warlock would have been a better choice than the Death Knight for being kind of the alternate to the Mage. And then the Death Knight would have been a better foil for the Knights and the Paladins. But that would have gotten rid of the Ogre Mage, and that's something that I would have been okay with. But yeah, I can see kind of why they did that. It just feels a little weird to have a Death Knight in this, but completely eliminate the Warlock entirely. So the Paladin and the Ogre Mage, they both have some spells that they can use as well. The Paladin has Holy Vision, Healing, and Exorcism. The Ogre Mage has the Eye of Kilrog, Bloodlust, and Runes. They're fine. It's kind of interesting that they do have these character upgrades. So you can really only upgrade your archers and troll axe throwers, and then your knights and the ogres can be upgraded. Nothing else really gets a class upgrade. They still can get upgraded through, like, the blacksmith, but those are things that affect everyone. And then also they added in a few more resources that I already talked about. So here are the cheat codes for the game. You've got Deck Me Out, which upgrades your weapons and armor. Every little thing she does gives you all the spell upgrades and infinite mana. Glittering Prizes gives you and your opponent 10,000 gold, 5,000 wood, 5,000 oil. Hatchet, that cuts down trees faster. It Is a Good Day to Die gives you mostly invincibility, and it increases your attack power, but there are some attacks that can still hurt you. Make It So speeds up the build time. Never a Winner disables victory conditions, which sounds like the stupidest cheat code ever. No Glues, Noglues, all one word, that disables the mission briefings and victory/defeat scenes. On Screen reveals the map. Show Path reveals the map but leaves Fog of War in place. There can be only one that takes you to the campaign victory screen automatically. Tiger Lily enables you to kind of skip to a certain level, so you would use that and then also use Human X or Orc X, where X is the level that you want to skip to. Unite the Clans is an instant win scenario, or instantly win the scenario, sorry. Valdez gives you 5,000 oil, and You Pitiful Worm causes you to lose the scenario instantly. The visuals are overall better than the first game. Everything just looks a lot smoother and less pixelated. The only thing that I don't like as much would be the fire animations. I think they looked a little bit better in the first game, along with when buildings explode. For example, when you destroy buildings in the first game, they get set on fire. The fire grows as it gets closer to being destroyed, and it's just kind of a terrific way to visually show how much damage you're doing to a building without, clicking on it to see how many hit points it has left. Both games do this, and the fire looks pretty good, but I think the first game did it a little better, and maybe that's because everything else didn't look as good, and the fire kind of stood out a little bit more, but I still like it a little bit more in the first game than I do in this one. However, everything else looks a lot better. The character animations are better in this game, the buildings look a lot better, the environment is much better. Warcraft II is a beautiful game that still looks really good today. Well, these cutscenes that I'm showing looked impressive for the time, or at least I thought they did. Yeah, they're not as great as they could have been, or at least they're not as great as they used to be. This is where nostalgia kind of comes in, and I remember them being so much better than, what they are today. They are still really cool to see, though, especially since they were kind of like a treat for completing a few missions and then going on to the next act. You would get one of those little scenes, and it was pretty cool. The ending scenes in the second game, I don't like them as much. I kind of liked the first games more because you had sort of those two kind of animated characters who were largely doing the same animations over and over on a loop, but that was a little bit cooler than just, a book and a dagger or a scroll and a dagger sitting there, which is what you get for both the orcs and the humans. It's just a different dagger, the text scrolls over it, and yeah, it doesn't look as much fun as it did, or it doesn't look as good as it did in the first game. But having these cutscenes, man, these really make the second game a lot better, especially just having something like this, where the first game didn't really have that. So these are a welcome addition, even if they don't look as good as they did back in the 90s. And I just love that you have these two things here where if you're the Alliance, you get to see the whole portal being destroyed. And if you're the Orcs, you get to see just this rampaging of the castle in Lordaeron. And you have the king standing there with his two guards, just I don't know why he's just sitting on his throne waiting to be killed by the orcs, but it's kind of funny. Even if it is someone who's going to be killed, it's kind of hilarious to see that. As I mentioned earlier, the human ending is canon, and that sets up all of the events for the expansion pack and then the third game in the series. So we'll talk about those some other time, but for right now, I really like this game, and I think let's talk a little bit about some of the memories I have of it. This was a game that my brother and I played a lot, especially during Christmas. There really wasn't anything else going on, so yeah, we would trade off playing this and just try to get a little bit farther each time. I'm not sure which one of us found out about all the cheat codes, but yeah, it must have happened like during lunchtime or something like that, because at this time we were both in high school and there was no more recess, at least for us. So you had like this extended time after lunch that you could just sit around and wait for classes to start up again. And I remember talking with my friends who played this game. I'm assuming my brother did a similar thing because we never had classes together, and he never had lunch at the same time I did. He was a senior when I was a freshman in high school, so we never really interacted unless it was the ride home from wrestling practice. That was the only time we ever talked to each other, really. But we at some point found a number of the cheat codes. There are a few that I had no idea about until like I looked up information on this. So we would spend a lot of time during the winter break just trying to figure out what was going on with this game, what we needed to do, where we needed to go in certain levels, and just sort of mapping everything out to figure out how to beat this game. Once we found the cheat codes, that became so much easier, but it was still a lot of fun to just sit down and play something like this, figure out where all the gold mines and all of the oil slicks are, and yeah, it was a really fun game to play back then. It's still a lot of fun now, but there's sort of this thing that I can't really describe too well, where I know where a lot of this stuff is and I know what I need to do now. So it's a lot different playing this close to 40 than it was when I was in my teens. Maybe it's just because I'm a lot smarter than I was back then, so I can kind of think through a few of the things a little bit better. But it is still a fun game to sit down and play and just try to figure out what's going on with it. And if you do try to go through without any of the cheat codes, it can be an awful lot of fun, and it is still challenging to this day. Unlike a few of the other real-time strategy games like Command and Conquer, I don't ever remember playing this with any of my friends. With Command and Conquer, I remember playing a few times, just over LAN or over a network connection with a few of my friends. But with Warcraft 2, I never remember doing that. Like, there were no times when I would go into the computer lab and play this game with my friends. There was never a time that I took this over to a friend's house to play. And I don't remember ever going over to anyone's house to play this game. It's a little weird. I think that I played it with my friend Drew a few times, but aside from that, I kind of just remember playing this with my brother. So it's kind of a unique experience that I didn't have aside from like a handful of NES games that we rented back in the day. Warcraft 2 is one of those games that kind of pulled me away from some of the later 90s and early 2000s RPGs that I loved playing on the PS1. It's a fun game that set up a lot of what would be picked up for World of Warcraft. It was a big part of my Christmas breaks, and yeah, it was a lot of fun when I was playing it in high school. I still like the Command and Conquer series more than the Warcraft series. I do remember like really eagerly waiting for the third game to come out, and back then I had no concept of how long it took to make video games. Unfortunately, when the third game came out, I had already joined the Navy, and I had just completely missed this game altogether. I wasn't really paying attention to gaming news back then. I was paying attention to it even less than I do now, actually. And the Warcraft 3 was just one of the games I completely missed out on. So, well, Warcraft 2 is one of my favorite real time strategy games. It kind of feels a little bit incomplete, like I don't know the entire story that led up to World of Warcraft. I remember being a little lost when I started playing World of Warcraft because, well, I was just trying to play it with my friends, and I didn't know all the story that built up to it. So there was a whole nother continent and everything, and a few new races that I had no idea of. It was kind of strange to go from playing Warcraft 2 and playing the expansion pack to playing that game and just having no idea what was happening, but trying to have fun with a bunch of people who, at that time, were some pretty good friends of mine. Anyway, that's going to wrap things up. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I would love to hear some of your memories of playing Warcraft 2, or really any of the Warcraft games. I will talk to you all later. Bye.